All right, Going the Distance, episode 3. I'm your host, of course, Jacob Koopman, the soundboard god, and we've got a very interesting and entertaining weekend of fights to talk about, as well as just some other news from the UFC, the MMA world. Got to talk about Chandler versus McGregor for TUF. We got to talk about Kevin Lee potentially coming back to the UFC. We, of course, got to talk about UFC 284. Makhachev had some problems with the promotion of the event. I figured I'd give my 2 cents. But first, let's start with Bellator 290, and of course, Fedor Emelianenko's last fight, an absolute legend on a lot of people's GOAT lists. I mean, listen, he's in the conversation of the sport itself, right? But in the heavyweight conversation, I feel like he's almost undeniable, right? So it's kind of a given at heavyweight that he would be a GOAT, and then you could make a strong case for him as one of the GOATs, the pioneers for the sport of MMA. But he did have his retirement fight this weekend. We also have to talk about the co-main, Eblen Vs Tokov. I thought Tokov looked good early, but then Eblen kind of established that wrestling background that we know him and love him for, and he was able to take control of that fight and show why he's the middleweight world champion of the world. So let's get into it. I want to start, though. I want to start with my honest critique and analysis of that Fedor fight. Did it have to happen? Not really. I was kind of wondering because it was his retirement fight. I remember saying to my father as I was watching, I said, what happens if Fedor gets the belt? Does he then just give it back to Bader? Like, does he say, here you go, I'm riding off into the sunset to coach some guys, right? So it almost was kind of like, it felt to me more like Bellator was giving Fedor his flowers, which is fine. I mean, he's a legend, and he has been a big part of Bellator. He's fought, I think he's 40, I think he's in his 50s now. I'd have to check. Let me look this up here. If I'm remembering, 46 years of age. So he is an old man in his own regard. He's had a storied career. And that's the vibe that I got from this fight. It was Bellator saying, you've done so much for us, for the sport as a whole. Let's give you this kind of a severance package, right? So in that sense, I didn't mind the fight, but also you kind of only saw it going one way. Bader was old as well, but he was much more of the spring chicken. You saw at this fight. I mean, guys, when they get to that age, it is kind of the harshness or one of the harsh parts of combat sports is legends will stay around for a little bit too long, and then whatever it is, their movement, their chin catches up to them, and then they can't compete anymore. And that's what happened this fight, man. Bader caught him with some big shots. Some of the shots that didn't even necessarily hit him square were just glancing. You could see were having a big effect on Fedor, and it was a sad way to go out, man, but it's rare in this sport that you do get. I mean, I'm thinking of certain instances where that wasn't the case. So like GSP versus Michael Bisping at MSG, that was a really good way for GSP to go out. Then you have the other side of the coin where I remember Chris Gutierrez knocked out Frankie Edgar in really bad fashion with a flying knee for Frankie Edgar's retirement fight when his family was sitting cage side. So that's usually, I mean, listen, we're talking about the GSP case. That's kind of the outlier. That's the exception to the rule. And Fedor fell to the same fate, man. It was both sad. It was kind of a bittersweet moment, because of course he did get stopped. It was a TKO for Bader, but then you see all of the legends of the sport. So Chael Sonnen, undefeated, undisputed, never lost a round. You have Randy Couture out there. There's a bunch of pioneers from the sport came out and showed their respect and their admiration. And that's why, I mean, listen, I could come here and I could say, well, Bader was great at establishing the inside dominant lead foot. I mean, nobody wants me to really analyze this fight. Nobody wants this fight to be analyzed because this fight just didn't need to happen. It just did. I mean, it was more of a gift, but I feel like to analyze this fight would be kind of a sacrilege to the MMA gods. It's just one of those things, man, where time catches up with you. So congrats to Fedor on a storied career. I'm not sure where Bader goes next. I know he said he didn't have any plans on moving back down to light heavyweight. He had mixed success down there. I know he's the first 2-division champ in Bellator history, but the first time he went down there, I know he got finished. So I think he's just going to stay out at heavyweight, and we'll see what happens next for him. I can't imagine that retirement isn't close away for him because he's, again, an old man himself. But hey, to both guys, both legends of the sport, I've got nothing but admiration for them. So congrats to both gentlemen for getting in there and fighting. Why don't we talk about the co-main, Eblen versus Tokov. Tokov, a really nice fold to Eblen, really pushed him in a big way. It was funny because I was watching my father And I'm looking, that first round, Tokov looks really good. Now, one thing I did notice about Eblen was that whenever he was clearly so uncomfortable with his boxing. I don't know if you guys, for anyone that watched the fight, he would throw these big looping shots, and then his head would almost be, he'd be like looking down at the floor as he threw those shots. And I remember saying, man, if Tokov just timed a really nice knee or an uppercut and just kept his other hand up near his head, stayed defensively responsible, that could be the fight. But as the fight progressed, you got the sense that Eblen really got a hold of where the range was in getting to Tokov. And after that, man, there's a certain term that we use for this in MMA. I'm going to bleep out the last part of this for anyone that might be a little bit underage watching this, but it's called wrestle. Tokov got wrestled by Eblen. It was, I think Eblen went 8 for 15 on takedowns, and there was just certain junctures in the fight where he had Tokov up against the fence. Tokov would get back up to his feet, and listen, credit to him for that, for having the fighting spirit and the technicality to know how to be able to get back up to his feet, and then Eblen would just dump him back. Right, and the fight even ended with, it's like the most disrespectful takedown you can hit on someone to end it off with a bang. Eblen picks him up and just suplexes him. And then I noticed as he got more confident in the wrestling, it seemed like his boxing followed suit. He got a lot more tight with his combinations, with his punches. But I would say if he's going to stay champion for much longer, if you're Eblen, you want to take a look at this with your team, because there are going to be guys that have way better takedown defense than Tokov. You're going to want to take a look at your boxing, man, because early in that fight, that was some horrendous. And listen, I'm terrible. I just started training a week ago, but it looks like I would have been in there boxing. That's what I probably would have done worse than that. But it's like, it's the way that I throw punches, where it's like a wide shot, you're not really worried about where your head is. And it's kind of, I don't know. It seems like for a fighter at championship level, you'd expect a little bit better out of the boxing department. Nice body kicks by Tokov. He fought the fight that I think he should have fought. It seemed like he didn't have an answer for Eblen's wrestling offense. And it's funny because Tokov's usually known for his wrestling defense, and it's usually known to be pretty good, but it's that threat of the takedown, the threat of the stand-up. Eblen also caught him with a really, really nice elbow. I think it was at the end of round number 2 that had Tokov on skates. So that probably got into his head. It was an accumulation of Eblen broke him. Eblen broke Tokov. That's the best way I could describe this fight is Tokov was mentally and physically broken down. And so, man, you gotta feel good for Eblen, but also if you're his team, man, you gotta go watch some tape. There is no excuse for that level of boxing at the championship. And I know it's Bellator, and I know it's not quite the pinnacle, right? It's not UFC, it's not the PFL, but still, it's Bellator. And you have guys that have come over from the UFC. You're not going to be able to get away with that forever. But still, credit to both men for getting into the octagon. I don't want to take anything away from them there. And I thought that they both fought a really decent fight, and it's a dogfight. It was just a war of attrition, which is what a lot of people thought it would be. So we got exactly what we wanted as fans, and if you're Tokov, you'll be back. This is a big learning experience for him, because I feel like when guys get up to a certain point, probably at the pros, I wouldn't know this because I'm not a pro, but I'd say in anything, you feel like, if you're Tokov, you're like, all right, yeah, my takedown defense, nice. I don't have to worry. I could start throwing those body kicks, and he had some really good body kicks that he threw that fight. I can kind of keep this at range, and he's not going to be able to take. You run into a guy in Eblen that is able to take you down at will. It's definitely going to open his eyes to some more opportunities, and I know he's going to get better from this. We're going to talk about Lewis versus Sergey Spivak. Derek Lewis has been on a skid, to say the least. I watched a video by the Weasel on this, and I agree with him, man. It seems like the rest of the heavyweight division has just kind of, I don't want to say lapped Lewis in terms of skill level, but it seems like the rest of the division is too well-rounded for him now. Like, there was a time where he was in the top 3 and he was able to knock guys out with one shot, and I'm sure that's still the case. I said to my dad, if I was a betting man, I would have put down money on Derek Lewis by one shot, because he always has that trick up his sleeve. That's something that you can't teach. That's something that he has over, let's say it's 25 minutes, it's 15 minutes, doesn't matter what it is. He always has that in his back pocket. And that's not to take anything away from him, but he doesn't, it's clear that he's kind of banked on his power. And I talked about this in a Salt Poppy video I did. You saw guys like him, guys like Salt Poppy that have that natural kind of just boom, they have that spark in their shots that could put guys out. You see them go one of two directions, and that's guys that want to build their game around it. So, for instance, Saul Poppy has a really nice counter left that he generates all of his power from, and he sets things up with that. He parries with his right hand, and then he's looking for angles. You get the sense that it goes that direction where guys want to kind of build around their gift and kind of utilize the full extent of their game. And then you get the guys like Derek Lewis that are kind of more of the philosophy of, if I have power, why don't I just go out there and try to crack guys with it? And that's exactly what happened this fight. He was swinging wildly. Spivak took him down, created the angle, and got the head and arm choke. So if you're Lewis, you gotta, I don't know. He's in a tough spot that I think some guys that are big crowd draws get into, where it's like you're on a skid, but you're also a really fun fight. And so you're still going to continue to get top level guys, but hopefully this is a learning experience for Lewis, man, because he's one of my favorite fighters. He's a personality. He can crack, but he's really got to start getting more technical, developing a ground game. Shouldn't take me to say this. I mean, anyone with half a brain about MMA would know that man needs to do more for his game than just say, hey, I'm going to hopefully catch someone on the way out. I mean, take, for instance, the Alexander Volkov fight, and Lewis was getting dominated the entirety of that bout. He lands one big right, and then the fight is over. So we kind of saw this coming, right? And the two guys in the heavyweight division at that time that had this godlike level of power seemed to be Lewis and Ngannou. And again, to illustrate my point, you see the way that these two guys branched off from each other, where Ngannou goes and he develops a wrestling game. That's how, he fought a fantastic fight versus Gane. That was nobody saw that coming. I personally didn't see that coming. I thought that he was going to try to go for a big power shot and get himself knocked out by Gane's constant volume and sneaky shot selection. But he went out there and he created a more well-rounded game for himself. And Lewis, it sucks because his power really bailed him out of a lot of things. And I think that created this false sense of security in his head. And now that the rest of the division is caught up to him, what are you going to do? It's time now. Hopefully this will be a wake-up call, because I don't want to see this man out of the UFC. He's too much of a fun dude to root for. And if you hear his story, you'd want to root for him too. Congrats to Spivak for just absolutely putting on a technical smashdown of his opponent and proving why he should be in the upper echelon of the heavyweight division. He's now one of these new breed of heavyweights that seems to be way more well-rounded. So like Tom Aspinall, obviously gone. John Jones is going to be becoming a heavyweight in a little bit. You still have the old guys like the Tai Tuivasas that like to slang and bang, and of course like Lewis, but these new guys that are really good everywhere, it's going to breathe new life into this division. So I'm really happy that they're kind of catching up to the smaller weight classes in terms of skill, right? And it's not just one punch wins it all, right? This is a new era that we're ushering into the heavyweight division. And then, of course, Stipe's coming back too, so I'm going to be really happy to see where that takes us. One of the GOATs, or someone that you could put strongly in the GOAT conversation at heavyweight. All right, so Chandler versus McGregor set to be coaches on Tough. I'm not probably going to watch I've never been a Tough guy. I like to watch little viral clips that come out of the show. For instance, that TJ and Cody Garbrandt season, even the first McGregor season where he's having the back and forths with Uriah Faber. I enjoyed the Chael Sonnen, Wanderlei, I can't let you get close moment. That was all-time classic, right? So I like watching the little clips, and I probably will do this for the upcoming season, but this is not enough to make me want to, quite frankly, tune in to watch, I don't know, someone get the shot of a lifetime, right? If I wanted to watch a fight, I would just go on YouTube. UFC has free fights all over the place, and I'd catch one of those, right? And what the UFC is doing, it's clear, is that they're hoping to kind of breathe new life, let's just say, into the Tough universe, right? Because it's been slow for Tough. It's been slow, right? This last season wasn't bad, but I just feel like not a lot of people watched it. And I couldn't even necessarily tell. I think it was Juliana Pena and, it was Amanda Nunes and Juliana Pena. The show's had a rough kind of go of things recently, and I know what the UFC is going for here, where they're trying to revitalize that series, and that's respectable. But I don't know. This seems like the lineup they have. So McGregor and Chandler, seems like it would be much better to just tune into the viral clips that come from it. Because there'll be some viral clips, for sure. McGregor is McGregor, Chandler's Chandler. They're going to get after it in their own funny way. But what fans are really, really looking forward to is the fight. It speaks volumes, too, because nobody's talking about the show itself, right? Everyone's just talking about the fight that's going to occur at the end of the show. I think they targeted it for May. That's going to be an interesting one, man. I want to do a breakdown, a tactical breakdown of that fight at some point, because I've had my thoughts on how that's going to go, and it seems to be pretty divisive in the comments section when they first announced that for the show. A lot of people on either end of the fence about that, so that should be really fun to watch. I'm talking about the fight and catch some of the nice viral moments that you know, the crumbs that they leave us from each episode, especially because it's going to be on ESPN Plus, and nobody that I know watches ESPN Plus for the series, right? It's all about streaming live sports that you can't usually get on TV. So probably the first like 1, 2, and 3 episodes will get some increased viewer traffic, but I think after a while, nobody's really going to be paying attention to what Chandler and McGregor are doing on The Ultimate Fighter. But I respect the UFC for trying it. It's going to be interesting to see where Conor McGregor is with his new weight and just his new kind of beefy frame. Seems like he's more of a welterweight now, and how Chandler's going to evolve his game past just getting into absolute wars and slugfest. Because if he plays that game with McGregor, I'll tell you right now, there's a good chance he's going to lose. All right, so Kevin Lee posted up with Dana White or vice versa. I know I saw the post of them having a meeting, so that means that Kevin Lee, after fighting Diego Sanchez at Eagle FC, will potentially be back in the fold. He had one of the nastiest knockouts over Gregor Gillespie I've ever seen. A nice cross to switch head kick combination that just had Gregor sleeping, had Gregor snoozing. I mean, one of the best knockouts in UFC history. A guy that is a personality, was kind of in the upper echelon of the weight class. And after that fight with Oliveira, I don't know if he was necessarily ever the same. Had a classic with Tony Ferguson. So this guy, and listen, he's important to the sport. I don't want to say that he's not, just because he's not necessarily, I don't believe him to be championship level. I don't want to say that just because he's not at that level that he's not important to the sport, because he definitely is. He's a fun guy to watch. He's definitely interesting, an interesting dude in everything that he does. Athletic. I think he said at some point he doesn't even train with weights. He just does yoga outside of sparring and training in the gym. So that's and he's ripped. Like he's an in shape dude. So looks like yoga might be the new meta for UFC fighters if they want to get absolutely jacked. Not sure I believe totally that that's the only thing that he does is hot yoga. So he's 30 right now. He should be right on his prime, and I wouldn't mind seeing him back in the sport. I just think he'd be an interesting extra addition for guys, for a nice fold for some of the biggest personalities in the sport if they want to make big fights. I know maybe that's kind of an unpopular take to have, but I do like him being injected back into my veins in the UFC, because a Kevin Lee fight is a fight that I'm always going to tune into. If you can make me watch Eagle FC and you can make me watch a washed Diego Sanchez fight, that's how you know you're a good fighter. All right, and rounding off the show for today, we've got to talk about UFC 284, the absolute stacked card in Perth, Australia. It seems that Makhachev is really, really unhappy with the level of promotion that it's gotten from Dana. Obviously, both Alexander Volkanovski and Islam Makhachev are putting their belts on the line in Perth. That's going to be such a fun. That's coming up on the 11th. So that's 6 days from now. That's next Saturday. That's going to be a big one. I'm going to do a full breakdown analysis video on that. That should be, and I checked some of the other talent on the card too. Yair Rodriguez, Josh Emmett, Jack Della Maddalena, Randy Brown, Justin Taffa, Parker Porter, Jimmy Crute, Alonzo Menifield. So it's not like the outside of the top two, the co-main and the main, it's not like the biggest. It's supposed to be Robert Whittaker and Paulo Costa on this card, but that got canceled. Nonetheless, it's a decent card. It's a decent card, but I do think just for that main event alone, there should be a little bit more promotion. So I understand maybe why Dana. It's not one of those cards that's a big mega, stacked to the gills MSG type of thing where you have the top, the 5 main card bouts are like the craziest. All of them are individually the craziest fights you've ever seen. But I still do think that we should take a look at the fact that the Power Slap League, which is literally a league where two guys get paid $2,000 each to slap each other in the face till one of them gets knocked out. Why is that getting more press coverage than UFC 284? Over one of the biggest legacy fights that the company has ever seen. That is what is beyond me. If you want to just do promotion for the top two, that's fine. That's all you really, in my personal opinion, need to promote for this fight. And I think it's a cool thing too that if you want to capture, right, the Australian fans, I think it's a cool thing too that Dana has stacked that card up with local talent for Perth. Market that fact. Right? Like, say that, hey, for this Australian crowd, we're going to bring out all of your guys. We're going to put our best foot forward for your guys as athletes. Robert Whittaker was supposed to fight, but again, what are you going to do about that one? You've got some fun guys that can crack, some guys that can fight. Jack Della Maddalena is never in a boring fight. Same with Jimmy Crute. So, there's no reason why Dana shouldn't be able to create something marketing-wise around this. With that, guys, that's been the podcast for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for your continuing support with the channel. It's growing like crazy. And I will deliver some shorter form videos as usual in the coming week, especially one talking about UFC 284. We got to cover some things in the YouTube boxing scene and just generally in the combat sports world, as we always do. It's been your host, Soundboard God, Jacob Koopman, and see you in the next one.